Terrified screams filled the cabin as the aircraft violently shook. Through the chaos, flight attendant Jasmine Washington locked eyes with 12-year-old Elijah Johnson, who sat frozen while oxygen masks dangled above. Just hours earlier, this same boy had been the center of an ugly confrontation that would change everyone's lives forever. Before I tell you how this shocking story unfolds, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to catch more incredible true stories of courage in the face of injustice. Now, let's rewind to see how Elijah's journey began. Elijah Johnson stood at the Atlanta International Airport departure gate, clutching his sheet music like a shield. The 12-year-old pianist shifted nervously from one foot to the other, his eyes darting between the boarding pass in his hand and the line of passengers ahead of him. "You've got everything, right?" his mother Keisha asked, smoothing down his collar one last time. "Boarding pass, competition papers, your lucky Mozart sheets." "Yes, Mom," Elijah nodded, patting his backpack. "I triple-checked." Keisha knelt to meet her son's eyes. Her hands rested on his shoulders, strong and steady despite the worry in her gaze. As a single mother working 2 jobs, she couldn't afford to take time off to accompany him to New York. This prestigious music competition was Elijah's chance at a full scholarship to one of the nation's top music conservatories, an opportunity that could change the trajectory of his life. "Remember what Mrs. Chen taught you about stage fright?" Keisha asked. Elijah inhaled deeply, counting to 4 in his head, then exhaled for 6 counts. "Breathe through it. Find one friendly face in the crowd." "That's my boy," Keisha smiled, but her eyes glistened. "This is as far as I can go." She gestured toward the security checkpoint. "Call me the second you land in New York, and when you get to the hotel." "I will," Elijah promised, wrapping his arms around his mother's neck. He breathed in her familiar scent of vanilla lotion and coffee, trying to memorize it for when homesickness would inevitably hit later. "I'm so proud of you," Keisha whispered, giving him one final squeeze before pulling back. "You're going to play beautifully. Just like your daddy would have." Elijah nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His father had been gone for 5 years now, but he still felt his presence whenever he played the piano. After one last wave to his mother, Elijah joined the security line, carefully following all the instructions the airline had provided for unaccompanied minors. Once through security, an airline representative escorted him to the gate, where he was among the first to board. "Window seat 14A, the gate agent confirmed with a smile. "That's what you requested, right?" Elijah nodded gratefully. His music teacher had suggested a window seat might help with his flight anxiety, giving him something to focus on during takeoff and landing, the most stressful parts of flying for him. Settling into his seat, Elijah placed his backpack carefully under the seat in front of him, keeping his lucky sheet music in his lap. He gazed out the window, watching ground crew members scurry around like ants from this height. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac, and Elijah found himself composing a melody in his head inspired by the scene, a technique Mrs. Chen had taught him to manage anxiety. First time flying alone. Elijah looked up to find a flight attendant with a warm smile standing in the aisle. Her name tag read, Jasmine Washington. "Yes, ma'am," Elijah replied politely. "Well, you're in good hands," Jasmine assured him. "I'm Jasmine. Since you're an unaccompanied minor, I'll be checking in on you during the flight. Need anything, just press this button." She pointed to the call button above his seat. "Thank you," Elijah said, feeling a bit more at ease. "What's taking you to New York?" Jasmine asked. "Piano competition," Elijah answered, his fingers unconsciously moving in the air, practicing the most difficult passage of his competition piece. "A musician. That's wonderful," Jasmine's smile widened. "My brother's a jazz pianist. I'll make sure you get there safe and sound for your big performance." As Jasmine moved on to help other passengers, Elijah turned back to the window, watching more passengers board from the jet bridge. For the first time since leaving his mother, he felt a flicker of excitement cutting through his nervousness. He was on his way to New York City, a place he'd only seen in movies, to play piano in front of real judges. The thought was terrifying and thrilling all at once. The plane gradually filled with passengers, most paying little attention to the young black boy sitting quietly by the window. Elijah took deep breaths, visualizing his performance, feeling the keys under his fingers. He was so lost in thought that he barely noticed as the final passengers boarded the plane, including a frazzled-looking woman and her daughter, who would soon disrupt his journey in ways he couldn't imagine. Final boarding call for Flight 1257 to New York LaGuardia. The announcement echoed through the terminal as Patricia Whitfield power-walked toward the gate, dragging her reluctant daughter Madison behind her. "Mom, you're hurting my arm," the 10-year-old whined, her designer backpack bouncing against her shoulder. "If we miss this flight, we miss your pageant interview, and we've invested too much to let that happen," Patricia snapped, her highlighted blonde bob swinging with each determined step. They were the last to board, Patricia's face flushed with exertion and irritation as she thrust their boarding passes at the gate agent. "We've been paging you for the past 15 minutes, ma'am," the agent said with practiced patience. "Well, we're here now," Patricia replied curtly. Once on the plane, Patricia's irritation only intensified as she examined their boarding passes more carefully. "This can't be right," she muttered. "Madison, you're in 22B, and I'm in 26B. Both middle seats." She glared at the flight attendant who was helping an elderly passenger stow a bag. "Excuse me. There's been a mistake with our seats." Jasmine approached with a professional smile. "How can I help you?" "We were assigned middle seats in different rows," Patricia complained. "That's unacceptable. Madison is only 10. She needs to sit with me, preferably by a window. She gets carsick." "I understand your concern," Jasmine replied calmly, "but the flight is completely full today. The seat assignments were made at booking." "Well, I booked our tickets together," Patricia insisted, though her slightly averted gaze suggested otherwise. Jasmine checked her tablet. "It appears these seats were selected during online check-in yesterday." Patricia's lips thinned. "My assistant must have made a mistake. Regardless, we need to sit together. Madison needs a window seat for her motion sickness." While Jasmine attempted to explain the difficulty of rearranging seats on a full flight, Patricia's gaze drifted around the cabin, landing on Elijah sitting alone at his window seat. "What about there?" Patricia pointed. "That boy is by himself. Madison can take his window seat, and he can move to one of our seats." Before Jasmine could respond, Patricia was already marching down the aisle toward Elijah, Madison trailing behind. "Hello there," Patricia said to Elijah, her voice artificially sweet. "My daughter Madison really needs a window seat because she gets airsick. Would you be a sweetheart and trade with her? I'm sure you don't mind sitting in a middle seat instead." Elijah looked up from his sheet music, momentarily startled by the woman looming over him. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said politely. "This is my assigned seat. I specifically requested a window seat because I have flight anxiety." Patricia's smile tightened. "Well, surely your anxiety isn't as bad as actual physical illness. Madison throws up without a window to look out of." She gestured to her daughter, who was examining her sparkly fingernails, showing no signs of distress. "I'm really sorry," Elijah repeated, growing uncomfortable under the woman's increasingly hostile stare. "But this is my seat, and I need it to help with my breathing exercises during takeoff and landing." Patricia's facade of politeness cracked. "Listen, young man, Madison is a pageant contestant with an important interview in New York. She needs to arrive fresh and well-rested, not sick from motion sickness. Surely you can make this one small sacrifice." "My mom says I should stay in my assigned seat," Elijah said, his voice smaller but still resolute. Patricia's eyes narrowed, taking in Elijah's appearance more carefully, his worn sneakers, the second-hand jacket, the carefully mended backpack. Her expression shifted from annoyance to something more calculating. "I see," she said coldly. "Well, I suppose some people haven't been taught proper manners. Where I come from, young men are raised to be gentlemen. A few nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably at the woman's thinly veiled racism. An older man across the aisle cleared his throat disapprovingly, but said nothing. My mom taught me excellent manners, Elijah countered quietly, his hands now gripping his sheet music so tightly the edges were crinkling. She also taught me to stand up for myself respectfully. Patricia's face flushed. Well, your mother should have taught you that certain people need to know their place. A sharp intake of breath came from the woman in the seat behind Elijah. Madison tugged at her mother's sleeve, looking embarrassed. Mom, it's fine. I can sit in my assigned. It is not fine, Patricia cut her off. You deserve better than a middle seat. You deserve this window seat more than some kid like him. Her voice had risen enough that passengers throughout the cabin were now turning to look. Elijah sank lower in his seat, wishing he could disappear, yet unwilling to give up the seat that provided his only sense of security on the flight. Other passengers exchanged glances, a few frowning at Patricia's behavior, but most kept their eyes averted, unwilling to get involved. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as Patricia stood there, glowering down at Elijah, clearly not used to being denied what she wanted. Excuse me. Flight attendant. Patricia's voice rang out sharply as she flagged down Jasmine. I need you to handle this situation immediately. Jasmine approached, noting Elijah's distressed expression and the commotion that was beginning to disrupt the boarding process. What seems to be the problem? She asked calmly, though she'd already observed much of the interaction. This boy refuses to give up his window seat for my daughter who suffers from motion sickness, Patricia declared, gesturing dramatically at Elijah. Surely the airline would prefer to accommodate a sick child rather than deal with a medical incident mid-flight. Jasmine maintained her professional demeanor. Ma'am, as I mentioned earlier, every passenger has the right to remain in their assigned seat. This young man specifically requested his window seat during booking for his own comfort needs. Comfort needs? Patricia scoffed. My daughter has medical needs. If Madison has documented medical requirements, that's something that should have been arranged with the airline in advance, Jasmine explained. We could have made appropriate accommodations before boarding. I shouldn't have to jump through hoops to get decent service, Patricia retorted, her voice growing louder. It's just one seat. Why are you making this so difficult? Several passengers had begun recording the interaction discreetly with their phones. A middle-aged woman diagonally across from Elijah caught his eye and gave him a subtle, supportive nod. Ma'am, I understand your frustration, Jasmine continued, but I cannot force another passenger to give up their assigned seat. Perhaps I can help find someone else willing to trade. This is the closest window seat to where my daughter's assigned, Patricia interrupted. And I don't see why it's such a problem. These people always want special treatment but aren't willing to be considerate of others. A murmur rippled through the nearby rows at the unmistakable racial undertone of these people. Ma'am, Jasmine's voice took on a firmer edge, I need to ask you to watch your language. Comments like that are unacceptable on this aircraft. What comments? Patricia feigned innocence. I'm simply trying to take care of my daughter. If you people would just do your jobs properly. Is there an issue here? A new voice entered the conversation. First Officer Derek Reynolds had emerged from the cockpit for his customary greeting to passengers when he noticed the disturbance. Patricia immediately redirected her attention to the uniformed officer, relief evident in her expression at the sight of someone with more authority, and someone who was white. Yes, there certainly is, she said, her tone suddenly more reasonable. My daughter needs a window seat for her motion sickness, but this boy refuses to move, and your flight attendant isn't being helpful at all. Derek took in the situation with a quick glance, the indignant woman, her uncomfortable-looking daughter, the young black boy clutching what appeared to be sheet music, and Jasmine's professional but increasingly strained expression. Ma'am, our flight attendants are extensively trained to handle seating arrangements according to airline policy, Derek explained. If Ms. Washington has informed you that we cannot compel another passenger to change seats, then that is indeed our policy. Patricia's expression soured. So you're just going to let my daughter get sick because this boy won't be reasonable? Who's actually in charge here? The captain is in command of this aircraft, Derek replied evenly. But I assure you we're all following the same policies. Then I want to speak to the captain, Patricia demanded. Someone needs to take responsibility here. By now, several passengers had removed their earbuds or looked up from their books, watching the drama unfold. A few were whispering among themselves, and one man in a business suit 2 rows ahead had half risen from his seat, seemingly debating whether to intervene. The captain is completing pre-flight checks, Derek explained. I'm sure we can resolve this without. No, Patricia cut him off. I want to speak to whoever's in charge. This is ridiculous. I know people who can make sure this boy never gets to New York if he doesn't learn some manners. A collective gasp went through the cabin at the thinly veiled threat. Elijah visibly paled, his fingers trembling against his sheet music. Derek's expression hardened. Ma'am, threatening other passengers is entirely unacceptable. I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice and return to your assigned seat, or we'll need to take further steps. Are you threatening me now? Patricia's voice rose again. I'm a paying customer. My husband is an executive at Meridian Financial, and I promise you'll regret treating us this way. Jasmine caught Derek's eye and nodded toward the cockpit, silently suggesting it might be time to involve the captain. As Derek stepped away, Patricia turned back to Elijah. This could all be so simple if you just move, she hissed. But you're determined to be difficult, aren't you? Madison tugged at her mother's sleeve again. Mom, please, you're embarrassing me. I don't need the window seat that badly. Hush, Madison, Patricia snapped. This is about principle now. You need to learn that in life, you stand up for what you deserve. The tension in the cabin had become almost unbearable. Passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances, some pointedly returning to their books or phones to avoid involvement. But Elijah remained in his seat, arms wrapped protectively around his sheet music, his last link to confidence and security now serving as a shield against this unexpected storm. A hush fell over the cabin as Captain Michael Freeman emerged from the cockpit. At 6'2" with broad shoulders and salt and pepper hair cropped close to his scalp, his presence commanded immediate respect. The 4 stripes on his uniform gleamed under the cabin lights, and his measured, deliberate steps down the aisle spoke of his 20 years of military service before joining the airline. As one of the few black commercial airline captains in the country, Michael Freeman had navigated more than just aircraft during his career. The way he carried himself, straight-backed yet approachable, authoritative without being intimidating, reflected years of walking the delicate balance required of him in an industry where he was often the only black person in the cockpit. Good morning, he greeted in a deep, resonant voice that carried throughout the cabin without seeming raised. I understand we have a seating concern. Patricia's expression shifted subtly as she registered the captain's race, but she quickly recovered, pushing past her momentary surprise to adopt an air of righteous indignation. Finally, someone who can resolve this, she said, her voice honeyed with forced politeness. Captain, my daughter Madison suffers from motion sickness and desperately needs a window seat. We've asked this young man to switch, but he's being unreasonable, and your crew hasn't been helpful at all. Captain Freeman nodded thoughtfully, taking in the scene, Patricia's expectant expression, Madison's obvious embarrassment, Elijah's tense posture, and the attentive faces of nearby passengers. I see, he said calmly. Let me understand the situation completely. First Officer Reynolds, could you catch me up? Derek efficiently explained what had transpired while Jasmine added relevant details about the seating assignments. Captain Freeman turned to Elijah. Young man, may I ask your name and why you're traveling today? Elijah Johnson, sir, he responded, his voice quiet but clear. I'm flying to New York for a piano competition. It's a scholarship opportunity. A pianist, Captain Freeman smiled. That's impressive. And this is your assigned seat? Yes, sir. I specifically requested a window seat because I get anxious during takeoff and landing. My music teacher suggested focusing on the horizon helps. Captain Freeman nodded, then turned to Patricia. Ma'am, when did you notify the airline about your daughter's medical condition? Patricia shifted uncomfortably. Well, I didn't realize I needed to file special paperwork just to get decent customer service. I see, Captain Freeman replied. And Madison, how are you feeling right now? Are you experiencing any motion sickness symptoms at the moment? Madison looked mortified as attention shifted to her. No, sir. I'm fine right now. Has motion sickness been a serious problem for you on previous flights? He asked gently. Before Madison could answer, Patricia cut in. That's hardly relevant. The point is preventative measures. Any mother would understand that. Captain Freeman maintained his composed demeanor. Actually, it is quite relevant to determining medical necessity, ma'am. As captain, passenger safety is my primary concern, which includes both physical and emotional well-being. Patricia's expression soured. Look, I don't appreciate being interrogated. I know how things work. People make accommodations for each other. That's basic courtesy, something clearly lacking in his upbringing. She gestured dismissively toward Elijah. A ripple of discomfort passed through the observing passengers. Captain Freeman's expression remained neutral, but his eyes registered the comment. Ma'am, on my aircraft, we respect all passengers equally, he stated firmly. Your comments about this young man's upbringing are inappropriate and unwelcome. I didn't say anything about, Patricia began defensively. You didn't have to, Captain Freeman interrupted smoothly. Your implication was clear enough. Patricia flushed, realizing she'd miscalculated. You're twisting my words. This isn't about anything except my daughter's needs. Is everything okay, Elijah? Captain Freeman asked, deliberately turning away from Patricia to check on the young passenger. Elijah nodded, though his fingers still trembled slightly against his sheet music. I just want to get to my competition, sir, he said softly. And you will, Captain Freeman assured him. Patricia crossed her arms. So that's it? You're taking his side without even trying to find a solution. I want your name and employee number. This will go all the way to the top, I promise you that. What would you do in Captain Freeman's position? Would you force Elijah to move to keep the peace, or stand firm against Patricia's entitlement? Comment number 1 if you think Patricia should be removed from the flight, or number 2 if you think Elijah should give up his seat. Like this video if you've ever witnessed discrimination in public, and subscribe to see how Captain Freeman handles this tense situation. Let me know in the comments, have you ever had to stand up against injustice like Elijah? How did the confrontation end? Captain Freeman straightened to his full height, his decision made. The cabin remained silent, passengers watching with bated breath as the confrontation reached its climax. Ms. Whitfield, Captain Freeman said, using Patricia's last name for the first time, this is my determination as captain of this aircraft, Mr. Johnson will remain in his assigned seat 14A. You and Madison will either take your assigned seats as listed on your boarding passes, or you may choose to deplane and book alternative travel arrangements. Patricia's mouth fell open in shock. You can't be serious. You're choosing to side with him over paying customers. This isn't about taking sides, Captain Freeman replied evenly. Every passenger on this aircraft is a paying customer with equal rights to their assigned seats. What I will not tolerate is harassment, disruption of boarding procedures, or thinly veiled racist comments. Racist? Patricia sputtered, her voice rising an octave. How dare you accuse me of racism? This is discrimination against us. Several passengers couldn't suppress their reactions, a few coughs, a barely concealed snort of disbelief, a muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." Madison tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mom, please, can we just sit down?" Everyone's staring. Patricia ignored her daughter, her face flushing with anger. "I want all of your names. This airline will be hearing from my attorney. I've never been so insulted in my life. That's your final decision? Captain Freeman asked calmly. You're refusing to take your assigned seats. I'm refusing to be treated like a second-class citizen. Patricia declared, loud enough for everyone to hear, apparently oblivious to the irony of her statement given her treatment of Elijah. The tension was broken by a voice from several rows back, an older white businessman in an expensive suit who had been watching the scene unfold. Excuse me, he called out, standing up. I couldn't help overhearing. I think the lady has a point. Patricia's expression shifted to triumphant relief as Warren Taylor made his way forward. In his tailored suit and polished shoes, he presented the picture of corporate authority. Warren Taylor, he introduced himself with the confidence of someone used to being listened to. Platinum status on this airline for 15 years. I have to say, I'm disturbed by what I'm seeing here. Captain Freeman regarded him steadily. And what exactly is disturbing you, sir? The customer is always right, that used to mean something, Warren said, gesturing toward Patricia. This woman has a simple request for her child's comfort. In my day, young men were taught to respect women and show courtesy. A couple of other passengers, a middle-aged woman and a man in golf attire, murmured agreement. With all due respect, Mr. Taylor, Captain Freeman replied, courtesy doesn't require someone to give up their rights because another person demands it. And, the customer is always right doesn't extend to allowing harassment or discrimination on my aircraft. Warren's expression hardened. Discrimination? That's a serious accusation, Captain. Seems to me the only discrimination happening is against paying customers who expect reasonable service. I couldn't agree more, Patricia chimed in, finding her voice again. This is nothing but reverse discrimination. You're only taking his side because... Captain Freeman cut her off before she could finish the thought. Because what, Ms. Whitfield? Please, complete your sentence. The challenge in his tone was unmistakable. Patricia faltered, suddenly aware of the dozens of phones subtly recording the interaction. Because he's a child and you feel sorry for him, she finished lamely. Captain Freeman's gaze was unwavering. This is my aircraft, and on my aircraft, everyone is treated with respect. Mr. Johnson has the right to his assigned seat. Your attempts to pressure, intimidate, or shame him into giving it up constitute harassment, which violates our airline's code of conduct. He turned slightly, addressing Jasmine. Ms. Washington, please call for ground support. We have passengers who need to be escorted off the aircraft. You're removing us. Patricia's voice rose to a near shriek. For what? For asking for better seats. For creating a disturbance that interferes with the safety of this flight, Captain Freeman corrected. My decision is final. Warren stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're making a mistake, Captain. Do you know who I am? I play golf with your CEO. Then I'm sure he's taught you the rules of the game, Mr. Taylor, Captain Freeman replied coolly. One of which is knowing when you're out of bounds. Jasmine had already discreetly called for support using the cabin phone. Within moments, 2 ground security officers appeared at the aircraft door. This is outrageous. Patricia protested as Captain Freeman explained the situation to security. We've done nothing wrong. Mom, please, Madison whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Let's just go. For the first time, Patricia seemed to register her daughter's distress. Her anger momentarily faltered as maternal concern broke through. Captain Freeman noticed the shift. Ms. Whitfield, I understand this is upsetting. If you're willing to take your assigned seats now and discontinue this disruption, we can still accommodate you on this flight. For a moment, it seemed Patricia might accept the compromise. But Warren Taylor wasn't finished. Don't back down, he advised her loudly. This is exactly what's wrong with the country these days. Nobody stands up for what's right anymore. His comments seemed to reignite Patricia's indignation. He's right. This is a matter of principle now. Come on, Madison. We don't need to fly with an airline that treats its premium customers this way. As security prepared to escort Patricia and Madison off the plane, Captain Freeman addressed Warren directly. Mr. Taylor, will you be taking your assigned seat, or will you be joining Ms. Whitfield? Warren looked around the cabin, perhaps expecting a groundswell of support that never materialized. Most passengers were deliberately avoiding eye contact, unwilling to join his sinking ship. This is absurd, he muttered, but the fight seemed to have gone out of him. Fine. I'll stay. But your CEO will be hearing about this. Captain Freeman nodded. I would expect nothing less. As Patricia and Madison made their way toward the exit, they passed Elijah's seat. Madison unexpectedly paused. I'm sorry, she whispered, barely audible. Good luck with your competition. Elijah looked up, surprised by the genuine contrition in her voice. He nodded in acknowledgement, unable to find words. Patricia noticed the exchange and pulled her daughter away. Madison. Don't apologize to him. This is all his fault. As they exited, Captain Freeman addressed the remaining 2 passengers who had vocally supported Patricia. If either of you feel uncomfortable continuing on this flight given my decision, now would be the time to deplane. After a moment of tension, both decided to stay, sinking back into their seats with muttered complaints. As security finished their work and the aircraft door finally closed, a small smattering of applause broke out from passengers who had witnessed the entire confrontation. Captain Freeman raised his hand for silence. There's no victory here today, folks. Just a reminder that on this aircraft, we respect each other's dignity and rights. Now, let's prepare for an on-time departure to New York. As he walked back toward the cockpit, Captain Freeman paused by Elijah's seat. You okay, son? Elijah nodded, his posture relaxing slightly for the first time since the confrontation began. Yes, sir. Thank you. You stood your ground with respect and dignity, Captain Freeman said quietly. That takes courage. Your mother would be proud. As Captain Freeman returned to the cockpit, the regular hum of pre-departure activities resumed. Across the aisle from Elijah, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes leaned over. My name's Dr. Amelia Rodriguez, she introduced herself. I'm a child psychologist. Would you mind if I sat in this empty middle seat next to you for takeoff? Sometimes it helps to have company after a stressful situation. Elijah nodded gratefully. The tension in the cabin had dissipated, but the emotional aftermath still lingered in his trembling hands. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Captain Freeman's voice came over the intercom, steady and reassuring. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 1257 to New York LaGuardia. We're looking at clear skies for most of our journey, though we do have reports of some turbulence as we approach the northeast. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight. What none of them knew was that the some turbulence mentioned would prove to be a severe understatement, and their journey was far from over. The removal of Patricia, Madison, and the other disruptive passengers had delayed departure by 23 minutes. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, flight attendants completed their final safety checks with practiced efficiency. Jasmine paused beside Elijah's row. Everything okay here? She asked, her eyes conveying genuine concern beneath her professional demeanor. We're doing fine, Dr. Rodriguez answered from the middle seat. Just having a nice chat about piano music, right Elijah? Elijah nodded, still clutching his sheet music but looking considerably more relaxed. Yes, ma'am. Dr. Rodriguez's daughter plays violin. Jasmine smiled, relieved to see him recovering from the ordeal. That's wonderful. We should be taking off shortly. Captain Freeman asked me to bring you this. She handed Elijah a small cup of hot chocolate with miniature marshmallows floating on top. He said it might help with the takeoff jitters. Elijah accepted the cup with surprise. Thank you. My pleasure. And just so you know, several passengers came up to tell me they thought you handled that situation with remarkable maturity. She lowered her voice. Between us, I think you showed more maturity than some of the adults. After Jasmine moved on, the aircraft joined the takeoff queue. 2 rows behind Elijah, a middle-aged couple was engaged in quiet conversation. "Can you believe that woman?" the husband whispered. "Making such a scene over a seat." His wife shook her head. "It wasn't about the seat. You know that." "I know. I just wish I'd said something sooner instead of sitting there. At least the captain handled it perfectly." Similar conversations were happening throughout the cabin as passengers processed what they'd witnessed. Some were checking their phones, discovering that video clips of the incident were already beginning to circulate on social media, tagged with #EntitledKaren and #CaptainHero. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Elijah practiced his breathing exercises, focusing on the horizon as they lifted off. Dr. Rodriguez discreetly monitored his reaction, offering a reassuring nod when he glanced her way. Once they reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign dinged off, Captain Freeman emerged from the cockpit again. He made his way down the aisle, stopping to chat briefly with various passengers, creating a sense of calm normalcy after the earlier disruption. When he reached Elijah's row, he crouched down to eye level. "How's that hot chocolate treating you?" "It's really good, sir." "Thank you," Elijah replied, his voice stronger than before. "I hear you're quite the pianist," Captain Freeman said. "My mother taught piano for 40 years. She always said musicians make the best pilots, something about discipline and attention to detail." "Really?" Elijah's eyes lit up. "Absolutely. Both require practice, focus, and performing under pressure." Captain Freeman glanced at the sheet music. "Chopin?" Elijah nodded, impressed. "Nocturne in E-flat major. It's my competition piece." "Beautiful choice. Challenging, but I bet you've got it mastered." Captain Freeman stood. "I need to get back, but I wanted to make sure you were doing okay." "I am. Thank you for, you know." Elijah gestured vaguely, encompassing the earlier confrontation. "You stood up for yourself with dignity, young man. Never forget that." With a nod to Dr. Rodriguez, Captain Freeman continued his rounds before returning to the cockpit. The next hour passed uneventfully. Jasmine checked on Elijah periodically, bringing him apple juice and pretzels. Dr. Rodriguez shared stories about her own children's performances and competitions, helping Elijah mentally rehearse his upcoming performance. "Visualization is powerful," she explained. "Your brain doesn't always distinguish between imagining something vividly and actually doing it. So mentally practicing your piece can be almost as effective as playing it on an actual piano." Elijah closed his eyes, his fingers moving subtly over his sheet music as he imagined the keys beneath them. For the first time since boarding, he felt completely calm. That calm was shattered 90 minutes into the flight when the plane suddenly dropped. Oxygen masks deployed from overhead as the aircraft entered severe turbulence without warning. The plane lurched violently, sending unsecured items flying through the cabin. Screams and gasps filled the air as passengers grabbed for their masks. "Remember to secure your own mask before helping others," Jasmine's voice came over the intercom, remarkably steady despite the chaos. "Dar." Rodriguez quickly secured her mask, then turned to help Elijah, but the boy was frozen in place, eyes wide with terror, his breathing coming in short, shallow gasps. His sheet music had scattered across the floor in the sudden drop. "Elijah," Dr. Rodriguez said, her voice muffled by the mask, "I need you to put this on." But Elijah was spiraling into a full panic attack, the accumulated stress of the confrontation combined with his flight anxiety and now this emergency proving too much. His hands trembled uncontrollably, and tears streamed down his face as he gasped for air. Jasmine made her way down the violently shaking aisle, holding onto seat backs for stability. When she reached Elijah, she immediately recognized the signs of his panic attack. "Elijah," she said firmly, securing his mask for him. "Look at me. Focus on my eyes." Through the chaos, Captain Freeman's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've encountered unexpected clear air turbulence. I've turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. Please return to your seats immediately and secure your seatbelts. Flight attendants, prepare for immediate descent." The serious tone in the captain's voice told the experienced travelers that this was more than routine turbulence. Jasmine exchanged a quick glance with her fellow flight attendant, both recognizing the gravity of the situation. "Elijah," Jasmine continued, crouching in the aisle beside him despite the danger to herself, "I need you to breathe with me. Remember your piano exercises? Let's count together." She took his hand and tapped out a rhythm on his palm, 4 beats in, hold for 4, out for 4. It was the same pattern Elijah used when practicing difficult passages on the piano. The plane dropped again, eliciting more screams. Through the window, Elijah could see the wing flexing at an alarming angle. Warning lights flashed in the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Freeman's voice returned, "we've identified a system malfunction. We're diverting to Charlotte for an emergency landing. Please remain calm and follow all crew instructions." The word, "emergency," sent another wave of panic through the cabin. Jasmine maintained her position beside Elijah, continuing to tap the rhythm on his hand even as the plane shuddered around them. "When I was your age," she said, speaking clearly despite her oxygen mask, "I had panic attacks too. My brother taught me to imagine I was playing my favorite song. Can you do that? Can you hear your Chopin piece in your head right now?" Elijah closed his eyes, trying to focus on the music rather than the terrifying sounds of the aircraft in distress. Gradually, his breathing began to synchronize with Jasmine's tapping, the familiar rhythm providing an anchor amid the chaos. Dr. Rodriguez watched in admiration as the flight attendant continued to coach Elijah through his panic attack while simultaneously checking on other nearby passengers and maintaining her own composure. Through the window, the aircraft had descended below the cloud layer, and land was now visible below. They were losing altitude rapidly, but in a controlled manner that spoke to Captain Freeman's skill. "Brace for landing," came the instruction over the intercom, delivered by First Officer Reynolds. "Heads down, stay down." As the ground rushed up to meet them, Elijah squeezed his eyes shut, his fingers still moving in time with the nocturne playing in his head, finding unexpected strength in the music that had always been his refuge. The aircraft dropped through the sky at a controlled but rapid descent. Rain pelted the windows as they broke through a dense layer of clouds, reducing visibility to near zero. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was tense with controlled fear, passengers white-knuckled in their seats, flight attendants strapped in but vigilantly watching for signs of panic among those in their care. In seat 14A, Elijah Johnson kept his eyes squeezed shut, focusing on the rhythm Jasmine had tapped into his palm. The Chopin nocturne played in his mind, its gentle melody at odds with their dire circumstances yet somehow providing a lifeline to sanity. Dr. Rodriguez had her arm protectively around the boy's shoulders, her own face tense but determined as she maintained the breathing pattern alongside him. "You're doing great, Elijah," she whispered through her oxygen mask. "Just keep breathing with the music." The plane shuddered violently, causing several overhead bins to pop open despite being secured earlier. A chorus of gasps rippled through the cabin. "This is Captain Freeman," the intercom crackled to life. "We're beginning our final approach to Charlotte. Emergency vehicles are standing by as a precaution. I need everyone to remain in brace position until we come to a complete stop." The calm authority in his voice provided a measure of reassurance, but the gravity of their situation was impossible to ignore as the oxygen masks continued to dangle from the ceiling panels. In the cockpit, Captain Freeman and First Officer Reynolds worked in focused synchrony, their movements precise and economical as they fought to keep the aircraft stable through the severe weather while dealing with the system malfunction. Years of training and experience guided their hands as they prepared for a landing that would test the limits of their skill. Hydraulic pressure continuing to drop, Reynolds reported, his voice steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead. "Down to 62%. Understood, Freeman acknowledged, his eyes never leaving the instruments. Switching to backup system. Charlotte Tower, this is Delta 1257 on emergency approach. Request immediate landing clearance and emergency vehicles on standby. The radio crackled with the tower's response, confirming their priority status and the positioning of emergency response teams along the runway. Back in the cabin, Jasmine had been forced to return to her jump seat for the landing, but she maintained eye contact with Elijah from across the aisle, continuing to model the breathing pattern whenever he looked her way. The aircraft descended through the last layer of clouds, the ground now visible through the rain-streaked windows. The runway lights appeared in the distance, a welcome sight amid the gray downpour. Approaching decision height, Reynolds announced in the cockpit. Freeman nodded, his hands steady on the controls. Landing gear down and locked. Prepare for possible hard landing. As the aircraft lined up with the runway, another violent shudder ran through the frame. Warning lights flashed across the cockpit displays. Hydraulic system failure, Reynolds called out, urgency finally breaking through his professional calm. Switching to manual controls. Captain Freeman's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. Understood. Inform the cabin crew. In the main cabin, the chief flight attendant's phone rang with the alert from the cockpit. After a brief exchange, she addressed the passengers, her training evident in her controlled tone, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in brace position. The captain has informed us that we may experience a firmer landing than usual. Stay in your seats with seatbelts fastened until we come to a complete stop and you receive instructions from the crew." Elijah felt a fresh wave of panic threatening to overwhelm him at this announcement. His breathing quickened again, the rhythm he'd maintained beginning to fracture under the weight of terror. Dr. Rodriguez noticed immediately. "Elijah," she said, drawing his attention. "Remember what your music teacher told you about stage fright? Find one friendly face in the crowd. I'm right here with you." But Elijah's panic had progressed beyond simple reassurance. His breath came in short, painful gasps, his chest constricting as if bound by iron bands. Dark spots appeared at the edges of his vision. In desperation, Dr. Rodriguez reached down to the floor where Elijah's scattered sheet music had fallen. Grabbing a page, she placed it in his hands. "Feel the music, Elijah. Your fingers know what to do even when your mind is scared." Elijah clutched the familiar paper, his fingers automatically finding their position on imaginary keys. Almost without conscious thought, his breathing began to synchronize with the tempo of the piece, moderato cantabile, the sheet music indicated. Moderate and song-like. Outside, the ground rushed up to meet them. Inside, Elijah forced himself to focus on the sheet music, on the phantom keys beneath his fingers, on the melody that existed only in his mind but provided a structure his panicked brain could cling to. 500 feet, Reynolds called in the cockpit. Landing checklist complete, Freeman confirmed, his focus absolute as he wrestled with the increasingly unresponsive controls. 300 feet. Runway in sight. Continuing approach. 200 feet. Winds gusting to 30 knots from the right. 100 feet. Prepare for touchdown. The aircraft crossed the threshold of the runway, rain pelting the windshield as Captain Freeman guided the wounded plane toward the ground. With the hydraulic system compromised, the landing would require perfect judgment, too soft and they risked bouncing back into the air with limited control. Too hard and the structural integrity of the landing gear could be compromised. In seat 14A, Elijah Johnson played a silent concert on his sheet music, his fingers dancing across the measures as his mind retreated into the safe haven of music. For just a moment, he wasn't on a failing aircraft plummeting toward the ground, he was on stage at Carnegie Hall, the keys cool and responsive beneath his touch, the audience silent as the nocturne's haunting melody filled the air. The wheels touched down with a jarring impact that rattled teeth and tested seatbelts. The aircraft bounced once, twice, then settled onto the runway with a screech of protesting rubber. Reverse thrust roared as Captain Freeman fought to slow their momentum without the full benefit of hydraulic brakes. Emergency vehicles raced alongside the aircraft, lights flashing through the rain as they maintained pace with the decelerating plane. Inside, passengers gripped armrests and each other, prayers and quiet whimpers filling the cabin as the aircraft continued its alarming speed down the runway. "Come on," Freeman muttered under his breath, applying maximum brake pressure through the backup system. Gradually, agonizingly, the aircraft began to slow. 2,000 feet of runway remaining. 1,500. 1,000. 500. Finally, the plane rolled to a stop near the end of the runway, emergency vehicles immediately surrounding it in a protective cordon. A collective exhale seemed to pass through the cabin, part relief, part lingering fear, part disbelief that they were actually on the ground in one piece. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Freeman's voice came over the intercom, weariness and relief evident despite his professional tone, "we have landed safely at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened while emergency personnel assess our aircraft. I want to commend all of you for your cooperation during this emergency, and extend my personal gratitude to my flight crew for their outstanding professionalism." As the adrenaline began to ebb, Elijah slowly lowered his sheet music, his hands trembling with delayed reaction. Beside him, Dr. Rodriguez gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You did it, Elijah," she said softly. "You found your strength when you needed it most." Across the aisle, Jasmine unfastened her harness and immediately made her way to check on him, kneeling beside his seat. "Are you okay, sweetie?" Elijah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. For the first time, he looked out the window to see emergency vehicles surrounding the aircraft, their lights pulsing through the rain. The reality of what they had just survived began to sink in. "Your piano breathing saved you," Jasmine said with a smile. "I've never seen anyone that young handle a panic attack so well during an emergency." "I just kept hearing the music," Elijah whispered. As the immediate danger passed and emergency procedures continued around them, Elijah felt something shift inside him, a new understanding of his own resilience. He had faced discrimination, stood his ground with dignity, and now survived a terrifying emergency by drawing on the very talent that had brought him on this journey in the first place. Outside, first responders worked methodically to secure the aircraft. Inside, a 12-year-old boy sat a little straighter in seat 14A, his sheet music now neatly gathered, his breathing steady and controlled. Whatever challenges awaited in New York, he now knew he had the strength to face them. The rain continued to pelt the aircraft as emergency vehicles surrounded them on the Charlotte runway. Inside the cabin, the initial relief of survival had given way to the practical reality of their situation. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, checking on passengers and providing updates as they became available. "Ladies and gentlemen," the chief flight attendant announced, "emergency personnel have completed their initial assessment. We'll be deplaning via the regular exits, not the emergency slides. Please remain seated until we begin the deplaning process, and remember to leave all carry-on items behind for now." Elijah sat quietly in his window seat, his sheet music now carefully reorganized and tucked into his backpack. The panic had subsided, leaving him exhausted but strangely calm. Dr. Rodriguez remained beside him, her presence a steady anchor after the chaos. "You know," she said gently, "what you did during the emergency was remarkable. Many adults couldn't have found that kind of focus." Elijah shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just didn't want to die without playing at the competition." Dr. Rodriguez smiled at his frankness. "That's a powerful motivation. And now you'll get your chance." Jasmine approached their row again, crouching in the aisle. "The captain wanted me to check on you specifically, Elijah. He said to tell you he's never seen better breathing technique during an emergency landing." A flush of pride warmed Elijah's cheeks. "Can you thank him for me?" "For everything. You'll be able to thank him yourself," Jasmine replied. "He's insisting on greeting every passenger as they deplane. He also wanted me to let you know that the airline will be making special arrangements for all unaccompanied minors to continue their journeys as quickly as possible." As they waited for deplaning to begin, Elijah's thoughts turned to his mother. My mom's going to be so worried when she hears about this. The airline has a team contacting the families of all passengers, Jasmine assured him. They'll let your mom know you're safe. She's probably already seen it on the news, Dr. Rodriguez added. These stories travel fast. Indeed, outside the aircraft, news crews had already gathered beyond the emergency response perimeter, their cameras trained on the aircraft that had made the dramatic emergency landing. The incident, coming so soon after the viral confrontation before takeoff, had created a perfect storm of media interest. When deplaning finally began, passengers moved slowly toward the exits, many still processing the emotional impact of their near disaster. As promised, Captain Freeman stood at the main exit door, personally greeting each passenger as they left. When Elijah's row was called to deplane, he gathered his backpack and moved into the aisle. Dr. Rodriguez stayed close behind him, having appointed herself his unofficial guardian until airline staff could take over. At the aircraft door, Captain Freeman stood in his slightly rumpled uniform, his face showing the strain of the emergency but his posture still commanding. He shook hands with each passenger, exchanging brief words of reassurance. When Elijah reached him, Captain Freeman's face broke into a genuine smile. Mr. Johnson, he said, extending his hand. The pianist who kept his cool. Elijah shook the captain's hand, suddenly feeling shy. Thank you for saving us, sir. We all played our part today, Freeman replied. Your courage during the confrontation and your focus during the emergency, those made a difference too. Don't forget that. As they descended the air stairs to the tarmac, paramedics waited to check passengers for injuries. Elijah and Dr. Rodriguez were guided to a medical assessment area where EMTs checked Elijah's vital signs and asked about his panic attack. His pulse and blood pressure are elevated but normalizing, one paramedic reported. No signs of physical injury. I'm fine now, Elijah insisted, eager to move forward with his journey. I still need to get to New York for my competition. One step at a time, Dr. Rodriguez advised. First, let's get inside the terminal and figure out what happens next. Inside the airport, a special area had been set up for passengers from Flight 1257. Airline representatives provided information, arranged accommodations, and coordinated continuing travel plans. Special attention was given to unaccompanied minors like Elijah, who were brought to a separate lounge where airline staff could provide more personalized care. Jasmine, now off-duty but still in uniform, had accompanied Elijah to ensure his handoff to the ground staff went smoothly. I've explained your situation, she told him. They're working on getting you to New York as soon as it's safe to travel. What about my competition? Elijah asked, anxiety creeping back into his voice. It's tomorrow afternoon. Let me check on that for you, Jasmine offered, stepping away to speak with a customer service representative. While she was gone, Elijah's phone rang, his mother's ringtone. He answered immediately. Mom. Elijah. Keisha's voice was thick with emotion. Baby, are you okay? I saw the news about your flight. I'm okay, Mom, Elijah assured her, fighting back his own tears at hearing her voice. It was scary, but I'm safe. We had to make an emergency landing in Charlotte. I'm coming to get you, Keisha declared without hesitation. I've already called off work for the rest of the week. I'm on my way to the airport now. But Mom, what about the competition? I still want to go. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. When Keisha spoke again, her voice was steadier. Tell me what happened, Elijah. Everything. Elijah took a deep breath and recounted the day's events, the confrontation with Patricia, Captain Freeman's intervention, and the terrifying emergency landing. As he spoke, he was surprised to find himself focusing not on the fear but on the moments of courage and kindness he'd experienced. And Captain Freeman said I kept my cool, he finished. And Jasmine, the flight attendant, she helped me remember my piano breathing when I was panicking. Dr. Rodriguez stayed with me the whole time. It sounds like you had some real angels watching over you, Keisha said softly. I'm still coming to Charlotte, but if you still want to go to New York for your competition, we'll figure it out together. Okay. Okay, Mom. Relief washed over him. I love you. I love you too, baby. More than anything. As Elijah ended the call, Jasmine returned with news. I've spoken to the competition organizers, she said. They've heard about what happened and are willing to reschedule your performance time to accommodate your delayed arrival. Really? Elijah's face lit up. Really? And there's more. Captain Freeman has been asking about you. He's finally completed his post-flight procedures and wants to make sure you're okay before he leaves. As if on cue, Captain Freeman appeared in the lounge doorway, having changed from his uniform into casual clothes but still unmistakable with his commanding presence. He spotted Elijah and walked over. How are you holding up, Mr. Johnson? He asked. Better now, Elijah replied. My mom's coming to Charlotte, and the competition organizers are going to reschedule my performance. That's excellent news. Freeman nodded approvingly. I wanted to check on you once more before I head out. It's been quite a day for all of us. Captain Freeman, Jasmine interjected, Elijah's mother won't arrive for several hours. The airline is arranging accommodations for him until then. Captain Freeman considered this information for a moment, then made a decision. Actually, if it's acceptable to all parties, I'd like to personally ensure Elijah gets to his competition. I have family in New York and was planning to take some leave time after this flight rotation anyway. Elijah's eyes widened. Really? With your mother's permission, of course, Freeman added. And in accordance with all airline protocols for unaccompanied minors. The appropriate arrangements were made, permissions secured, and protocols followed. When Keisha Johnson arrived in Charlotte 6 hours later, exhausted from the drive but determined to reach her son, she found Elijah in animated conversation with Captain Freeman, Jasmine, and Dr. Rodriguez, who had also chosen to remain with him until his mother arrived. The emotional reunion between mother and son brought tears to the eyes of everyone present. After the initial embrace and flurry of reassurances, Keisha turned to the three adults who had looked after her son. I don't even know how to begin thanking you, she said, her voice thick with gratitude. Your son is an exceptional young man, Captain Freeman replied. He showed remarkable courage today. He gets that from his father, Keisha said softly. As they talked, Elijah learned that videos of both incidents, the pre-flight confrontation and the emergency landing, had gone viral online. The story had captured public attention, with many commenters praising Captain Freeman's handling of the discrimination incident and Elijah's dignity under pressure. There's something else you should know, Jasmine added. The airline's CEO has been briefed on today's events. He's authorizing a special flight to New York tomorrow morning for passengers who still need to get there, with priority for Elijah and his mother. And I'll be the pilot, Captain Freeman added with a smile. If you're willing to fly with me again, that is. Elijah looked to his mother, who nodded her approval. I can't think of anyone I'd trust more to get us there safely, she said. Later that evening, as Elijah and Keisha settled into the hotel room provided by the airline, Elijah finally allowed himself to process the full weight of the day's events. His hands trembled slightly as he practiced his competition piece on an imaginary keyboard. You don't have to go through with the competition if you're not ready, Keisha assured him, watching his fatigue with concern. But Elijah shook his head determinedly. After everything that happened today, playing the piano will be the easy part. The next morning, a small group of passengers boarded the special flight to New York. Captain Freeman greeted each one personally, with special acknowledgement for Elijah and Keisha. Jasmine, who had volunteered to work the flight despite being entitled to rest, ensured they had comfortable seats. As they soared above the clouds, the flight smooth and uneventful, Elijah gazed out the window with new appreciation for the miracle of flight, and for the unexpected community that had formed around him in the midst of crisis. Mom, he said quietly, I think Dad would have liked Captain Freeman. Keisha followed her son's gaze to where the captain had emerged briefly from the cockpit to check on the cabin. Yes, she agreed, blinking back tears. I think he would have. In that moment, as the aircraft carried them safely toward New York and Elijah's delayed but not denied opportunity, the fear and discrimination of the previous day began to transform into something else, a story of courage, resilience, and the unexpected connections that can emerge from our most challenging moments. 1 week later, Elijah Johnson stood backstage at the Richardson Hall Auditorium in New York City, taking deep, measured breaths as he prepared to perform in the final round of the Young Classical Musician Scholarship Competition. His fingers felt nimble and warm after his careful preparation, and the familiar pre-performance butterflies in his stomach now felt more like excitement than anxiety. Through a gap in the curtains, he could see the audience filing in. His heart leapt when he spotted Captain Michael Freeman and flight attendant Jasmine Washington in the third row, both dressed elegantly for the occasion. Captain Freeman had exchanged his pilot's uniform for a charcoal suit, while Jasmine wore a vibrant blue dress. Beside them sat Dr. Rodriguez, who had rearranged her professional schedule to attend after forming such a strong bond with Elijah during their shared ordeal. In the front row, Keisha Johnson sat straight-backed and proud, her eyes occasionally darting to the backstage area where she knew her son was waiting. She had used her emergency savings to extend their stay in New York, refusing to miss this moment after everything they had been through. 5 minutes, Elijah, the stage manager informed him quietly. Elijah nodded, his mind flashing back to the events that had led to this moment. The past week had been a whirlwind of unexpected developments. The videos of Patricia Whitfield's racist behavior and Captain Freeman's dignified response had gone viral, amassing millions of views across social media platforms. The subsequent emergency landing had only amplified the attention, transforming what might have been a fleeting internet moment into a national conversation about dignity in the face of discrimination and courage under pressure. Patricia Whitfield had faced swift consequences for her behavior. Her employer, a prominent real estate firm with a diverse client base, had terminated her position after the videos emerged. Her attempts to control the narrative through social media had backfired spectacularly when former colleagues and employees came forward with similar stories of entitlement and racial insensitivity. More surprisingly, Madison Whitfield had reached out to Elijah through social media with a heartfelt apology. "I'm sorry for how my mom treated you," she had written. "What she did was wrong, and I should have said something sooner." The beginnings of an unlikely friendship had formed through their subsequent exchanges, with Madison sharing her own struggles with her mother's behavior and Elijah offering understanding rather than judgment. "Elijah Johnson to the stage, please," the stage manager called, pulling him back to the present moment. With one final deep breath, Elijah straightened his new navy blue blazer, a gift from Captain Freeman, and walked onto the stage. The polished grand piano waited for him, its lid raised to project the sound throughout the auditorium. He took his position on the bench, adjusting it slightly before looking out at the audience. The faces before him blurred slightly in the stage lights, but he could still make out his mother's encouraging smile, Captain Freeman's dignified nod, and Jasmine's subtle thumbs up. Drawing on the inner strength he had discovered during the flight crisis, Elijah placed his hands on the keys and began to play. The opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the auditorium, delicate and precise. As he played, Elijah found himself entering a state of flow where technique and emotion merged seamlessly. The piece that had played in his mind during those terrifying moments on the plane now poured from his fingertips with newfound depth and maturity. What had once been a technical challenge had become a personal statement, a testament to resilience and grace under pressure. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of profound silence before the audience erupted in applause. Elijah stood and bowed, his eyes meeting his mother's tear-filled gaze. Later that evening, as the competition judges deliberated, Captain Freeman approached Elijah and Keisha in the reception area. "That was extraordinary, Elijah," he said, his deep voice warm with genuine admiration. "You played with the kind of emotional insight that can't be taught." "Thank you, sir," Elijah replied, still flushed with the excitement of his performance. "Actually, I have some news to share with both of you," Freeman continued. The airline has been closely following your story, and the CEO was deeply moved by everything that happened. They've decided to implement new anti-discrimination training for all staff, using our experience as a case study." "Really?" Keisha asked, surprised. "Yes. And there's more. They've asked me to help develop the program, which means I'll be reducing my flight schedule to focus on this initiative." Before they could discuss further, the announcement came that the judges had reached their decisions. Everyone returned to the auditorium for the award ceremony. Elijah sat with his hands clasped tightly in his lap as the judges announced the third-place winner, then the second. When they called his name for first place, the scholarship prize his mother had barely dared to hope for, Keisha's joyful sob could be heard throughout the hall. As he accepted the award, a crystal trophy and a full scholarship to the prestigious Northeastern Conservatory of Music's youth program, Elijah spoke briefly but powerfully. "Music taught me to breathe through difficult moments," he said, his young voice steady and clear. "When faced with discrimination, it gave me dignity. When faced with danger, it gave me focus. This scholarship means everything to me and my mom, and I promise to make the most of this opportunity." The reception following the ceremony buzzed with conversation and congratulations. As Elijah and Keisha navigated the crowd, they were approached by a distinguished older man whom Captain Freeman immediately recognized. "Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Johnson," Freeman said formally, "may I introduce Mr. Robert Harrington, CEO of Atlantic Airlines." "It's an honor to meet you both," Harrington said, shaking their hands warmly. "Your story has had a profound impact on our company culture." "Thank you for everything your airline has done for us," Keisha replied graciously. "Actually, I'm here to discuss something new," Harrington explained. "We're launching a scholarship program for underprivileged youth interested in aviation careers, pilots, engineers, air traffic controllers. With your permission, we'd like to name it the Freeman-Johnson Initiative for Excellence." Captain Freeman looked as surprised as Elijah and Keisha. "Sir, I'm honored, but it was your leadership that day that exemplified our highest values," Harrington interrupted. "And Elijah's courage inspired us all." As they discussed the details of the program, Jasmine joined them, along with Dr. Rodriguez. "There's something else you should know, Elijah," Jasmine said with a bright smile. "Remember how I mentioned my brother is a jazz pianist? He's offered to give you complimentary lessons whenever you're in Atlanta. He says anyone who can keep their cool during an emergency landing deserves some improvisational skills to match." Later that night, as Elijah and Keisha returned to their hotel room, exhausted but elated, Elijah stopped to look out the window at the New York skyline glittering against the night sky. "Mom," he said quietly, "I've been thinking. What if I used some of the competition prize money to start a music program for kids at the community center back home? Kids who can't afford lessons like I couldn't before Mrs. Chen volunteered to teach me." Keisha wrapped her arms around her son's shoulders, amazed at the young man he was becoming. "I think that's a beautiful idea. Your father would be so proud of who you are." 1 year later, Elijah Johnson boarded another flight to New York, this time for his advanced placement audition at the Northeastern Conservatory. As he settled into his seat, 14A, window, specifically requested, a familiar voice came over the intercom. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Freeman speaking. Welcome aboard Flight 2463 to New York LaGuardia. We're expecting clear skies and smooth sailing today." Elijah smiled, remembering how far they had all come since that turbulent day. As he gazed out the window at the Atlanta skyline, he placed his fingers on his knees, mentally practicing his audition pieces. The plane began to taxi, but this time, there was no anxiety, no fear, only anticipation for the journey ahead and gratitude for the unexpected connections that had changed the course of his life. As the aircraft lifted off the runway, Elijah thought about the community music program he had founded with his prize money, now serving 35 children who would otherwise have no access to musical education. He thought about Madison Whitfield, who had found the courage to stand up to her mother's behavior and was now an unlikely ally in promoting tolerance among her peers. He thought about Captain Freeman, whose dignified stand against discrimination had sparked meaningful change within the airline industry. Most of all, he thought about how a moment of ugliness had ultimately revealed so much beauty in the world, through the courage of those willing to stand up for what's right, the kindness of strangers in a crisis, and the healing power of music that had been his salvation in more ways than one. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and the journey continued. What would you have done if you were in Elijah's position? Would you have stood your ground against discrimination or given up your seat to avoid conflict? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more inspiring tales of courage and resilience. Have you ever witnessed someone standing up against injustice? How did it change your perspective? Thank you for joining me for this journey, and remember, sometimes our greatest strength is revealed in our most challenging moments. This story teaches us that standing up against discrimination requires both courage and dignity. Elijah showed us how maintaining composure in the face of prejudice isn't weakness, it's strength. Captain Freeman demonstrated that true leadership means protecting the vulnerable, even when it's uncomfortable or unpopular. We learn that allies matter, from Jasmine's supportive presence to Dr. Rodriguez's compassion, and even the silent passengers who later found their voices. Their actions remind us that confronting racism isn't solely the responsibility of those experiencing it. The crisis revealed how adversity can transform us. Elijah discovered inner strength by connecting to his passion, showing that our deepest talents often sustain us through our darkest moments. Most powerfully, the story illuminates how standing against injustice creates ripples beyond the immediate moment, changing policies, inspiring others, and building unexpected bridges. Madison's growth shows that even those raised with prejudice can learn and change when exposed to its harmful impact. In our divided world, this reminds us that courage, dignity, and compassion aren't just personal virtues, they're catalysts for meaningful change. What moment in your life have you witnessed discrimination but remained silent? Or perhaps you found the courage to speak up? Your experiences matter in this ongoing conversation about racial justice. Share your story in the comments below, your words might give someone else the courage they need. If Elijah's resilience inspired you, hit that like button. If Captain Freeman's leadership moved you, subscribe to hear more stories of everyday heroes standing against injustice. Share this video with someone who needs reminder that one voice can make a difference. Thank you for joining me on this journey through a difficult but important story. Remember, change begins with individual choices made in everyday moments. Together, we can create a world where dignity isn't just hoped for, it's expected.